Welcome to the Rural Missions Podcast. We exist to enable rural churches in God's mission. So join us now as we hear stories of hope from across the UK. So welcome back to the Rural Missions Podcast. I am your host, Bob Goody, and in this episode I am joined by the Head of Mission for the Evangelical Alliance, Rachael Heffer. Hello, Rachael.
Hi, Bob. Lovely to be with you.
So that was a very, very quick intro. Why don't you expand upon that for our listeners? Who are you? Where are you from? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure, I would love to. So my name's Rachael Heffer, as you said. I live in Ely in Cambridgeshire, which is a beautiful small city with a very big cathedral. I've lived there for the last sort of 23 years. I'm married to Darren. He's an architect based in Cambridge, and I've got two teenage boys who are 13 and 16. So I'm very outnumbered in my household because they are sold out Arsenal fans as well. So feel sorry for me.
I think there's a few prayers just gone up as people are listening.
Absolutely. We are a happy household when Arsenal is winning, put it that way. Outside of that, I go to a local Baptist church in Ely. I've been there very much, particularly involved in some of the leadership, lots of the youth ministry over the last 25 years. And my background is based in youth ministry. Having done a language degree, God had other plans, and I ended up working in a place where I met you, Bob, which was both locally and nationally with Youth for Christ. So my background is working there for about 14 years. And then I worked across the Diocese of Ely, both with urban and rural churches. And as you said, my role now is Head of Mission. I serve based down in London, but across the UK as Head of Mission.
So obviously the Evangelical Alliance, they're helping sort of coordinate evangelicals, be a voice for those. What does your particular role mean as Head of Mission for the EA?
Good question. Well, as you said, as a unity organisation, the EA, really when it's stripped back, I would say that both the EA and a big part of my role is to cheer on and champion, resource, equip, pray for the local church. That is a huge part of my heart and passion. And there's many and varied ways in which we do that. So in the wider EA, we have an amazing advocacy team who speak on behalf of the evangelical church in the corridors of power in Westminster and indeed across the nations. We look at intercultural church, we do all manner of things, all different ministries of the church that we try and support. In terms of mission, really, what my role is to work again across the UK, so with our wonderful people based in Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland and across England, to really be getting alongside the church, alongside our many partner organisations, to be looking at what we can do together to encourage the church to be that little bit bolder and braver in terms of our own mission and evangelism. So that looks like various things, lots of mission partnerships, which we love working in partnership. It's all kingdom, isn't it? So the more we can do together, the better. For me personally, I've been speaking to a big piece of research called Talking Jesus Research over the last year or so, again, just to encourage and equip the church in their own culture of evangelism and so on. But really outside of that, in my role and with the wider mission team, we try, I guess, to stripped back, it would be to share good news stories, look at where there are great practice happening across our churches, and really encouraging the church to have those Christian real distinctiveness in all that we do, whether it's a toddler group, whether it's with older age ministry, urban, rural, youth, everything in between. That's part of our heart. But to do it together, as our strapline says, together we seek to make Jesus known. So that's a little bit about the heart of both my role, but also the wider EA.
Great, you said it far better than I gave in the intro. So you keep saying the word mission. Why are you passionate about mission? Why are you so keen to be head of mission for the EA and spurring mission? What is it that really stirs you to do that?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's the biblical mandate, isn't it? You know, Jesus told us to go out into all the world and make disciples. So as much as I'm passionate about the local church, being part of one, have been my whole life, you know, in church being community of people that belong and love and care for each other, we have such good news, don't we, that to keep it inside of our buildings would surely be a travesty, because we know that the world at large is hurting, isn't it? There's lots of pain, lots of reeling, lots of anxiety, well-being, and so on. And actually, if we keep the good news of Jesus to ourselves, then actually a lot of people who won't hear it. So I'm really passionate about just the breadth of mission, whether that's evangelism and taking the good news to people who don't yet know it, whether it's discipleship, again, in seeing people go on that journey in terms of faith, and mission as well in its practical sense of how can we reach and engage with and live alongside in often the grime, the trudge, the harsh reality of life, but to be people who would really take the good news gently, appropriately, boldly, loudly, however we're called to, into those different spheres. So I'm really passionate that on a really personal level, we as practicing Christians become more confident to share Jesus and be missional for those outside of our church walls, but also corporately as the church, that we get to do that together. And that can look very different across the UK, as we know, as indeed globally.
No, that's good. And for in real time today, we have an event that Rural Missions are hosting where you're going to be sharing some of the Talking Jesus research. And you've mentioned that earlier. Sorry, that event has gone, but I'm sure you can still be in touch and find out lots of information on this. But what is this Talking Jesus research? Because it's been around for a little bit in various instances. You've reconducted the research. What is it at the core that you're looking to share?
Yeah. Well, basically, the Talking Jesus research, as you've alluded to, the first lot of research came about in 2015. And it was a piece of research that basically, at its core, as you said, it maps the state of faith across the UK. And where it came from was a bunch of leaders, denominational leaders, heads of networks said, wouldn't it be great if we as Christians, rather than just anecdote, if we actually had some grounded facts and figures that told us what our non-Christian friends, those outside the church, reflect on the church of Jesus and of Christians, but also if we could map what we as practicing Christians feel about witness and evangelism. So a piece of research came about in 2015. The dream was always to redo it and map again 5 years on, but of course in came a sweeping global pandemic in 2020.
Yeah, that did put a bit of a knocker on most things, didn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Not the best time to conduct a piece of research that was across the UK. But what emerged was actually a wider conversation. Originally it was a 3-way partnership, now a 6-way partnership, including EA, Hope Together, Alpha and other friends around the table. But what it does is it really does, it's so informative because it paints the picture of what the mission landscape looks like in essence. So for the church, hopefully, certainly as I've been speaking to it, the 2022 research came out, I've been speaking to that over the last couple of years. Every room that we're in, it provides those light bulb moments of people going, oh, this is what the world at large is looking for. This is where people are open to faith and so on. But equally, it brings great encouragement, but also great challenge as well, because for us as the church, we're not getting everything right. There's more that we could do. And taking the good news of the gospel out, there's certainly avenues to do that. But the research, again, prompts us as the UK church to look at the ways and means to do that. So it's been a really helpful tool for equipping the church in this time and season.
And the thing that I love, Rachel, is I've seen you present on this. I've seen Rachel Jordan-Wolfe from Hope Together present on this. I've seen the research. I've read the research. I've spoke about it on many occasions in many different circles. And the thing I love is that it always manages to captivate and stir. No matter how many times I've heard it, something just grabs you. And I know from seeing you, and I'm sure this evening, you've still got such a passion for this research and for people to grasp the sort of fullness of what this means for us as Christians, engaging with our non-Christian friends. So you've shared this a few times now, without a doubt, but what would you say are some of the sort of key highlights that those listening on the podcast might be able to grasp as we're chatting it through?
Well, like you said, Bob, there's loads in it which just raises our spirits almost as Christian individuals, and it's absolutely fueled me personally ever more so over the last couple of years of speaking to it, to be honest. And fueled my passion for the church, what we as the church need to be. But yeah, just to whet your appetite, I mean, some of the stats that the research reveals to us are that actually 1 in 5 people across the UK but do believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And even more than that, 45% of people, so just under half of people across the UK, not only believe in Jesus, but they believe that they believe in the resurrection, that he died and rose again. I mean, even those two as a snapshot show, don't they? Probably quite a revelation for us, but they show that people, they have a concept of Jesus. They may believe the whole story of his death and resurrection in the entirety, but what a great discipleship opener of conversation. One of my favourite stats in the research is when we asked our non-Christian friends, so 4,000 people were surveyed through a credible research body, and out of those 4,000 we asked our non-Christian, so just over 3,000 non-Christians. The rest of the sample was a boost sample of practicing Christians. But out of those non-Christians, we said, if you were to think of a practicing Christian that you know, and 53% of people said that they do know a Christian, how would you describe them? So describe the practicing Christian that comes to mind. I don't know about you, Bob, but most of us would probably go to the negative. But actually what comes out is that they think, top 4 answers, they think we're caring, we're friendly, we're good-humoured and we're generous. Wow. I particularly like the good-humoured one. Isn't that good?
Have they met some of us?
Just you, Bob.
Yeah. No, I love that. What a great way to be
Absolutely,
known. Yeah.
Absolutely. And don't you think, again, that just maybe smashes our own preconceptions as Christians? You know, what comes out much lower down the list are things like homophobic or narrow-minded. And yet, actually, for many of us as Christians, partly because of the media, dare I say, but actually we think that overridingly people will think negatively of us. And actually it's just not true. And I love the fact that actually even looking at that statistic really should raise our spirits as Christians to say, oh, okay, people know us, they know us well, we're in close proximity, and they actually really like us. The second stat I'd pull out, which is one of the biggest takeaways for most people, it seems, is this. We asked non-Christians, if you've had a conversation with a Christian that you know, would you be willing or wanting to go again and find out more? And we found that 1 in 3 non-Christians say that if they've had an initial starter conversation, they would love to find out more and go deeper. I don't know about you, but I just find that really encouraging, quite staggering. But what makes this even better news, I mentioned the original research was 2015, and that statistic alone used to be, so now going back, 9, nearly 10 years ago, but that was 1 in 5. So what it shows us is that as we look at the wider cultural narrative, people around us, even in our own family, our own friendship groups, our workplaces, where 1 in 5 people were open to a conversation, it's now 1 in 3. So I think, again, you know, there's loads of research, lots of other statistics, all free to download on talkingjesus.org. But I love these stats that make us sit up and go, oh, people are really open, they're really searching. And actually the challenge, therefore, for us as individuals in the church is how do we make Jesus known to those around us? And not default thinking, I'm not the uber extrovert evangelist, that's not me, but actually looking at people want those conversations with me, with you, and maybe we could do that a bit bolder and braver than ever before.
Yeah, I'd like even just reflecting on that, thinking if I'm out with 6 friends, like most of us have probably got 6 friends that we could go out and engage with that are non-Christian, and to think that 2 of those are ready and rearing and waiting for a conversation and are open to me sharing what my faith means to me, like that's world changing. Because if between us we all bring 2 people into the kingdom, that's pretty much the entire world done and dusted.
Wouldn't it be amazing, you know, if actually we as the church actually, you know, thought what we've been told maybe by the media is actually simply not true. People are open to the conversation, as you've just said. But if we stepped into that thinking, do you know what, even when those conversations with the 1, the 2, as you've just said, if they come about, do you know what? We don't need to tell them the whole gospel in one go. Sometimes there's a time and a place for that, isn't there? But actually, I think it's a revelation to us, isn't it? Let's be normal. Let's be good friends. Let's journey with people. Let's go for a curry or a pint or go to a coffee shop or go to the gym or whatever. You know, look at those places where we already are and who God's put around us. And yet, what would it look like for us as the army of the church to gain a little bit more, you know, bravery and courage to just have conversations where we're prayerful, where we're intentional, where we're wholly normal, just being friends with people. But actually we, if you like, pepper our conversations with something that might just speak of, our life, our story. But also, as the research tells us, what do people remember from conversations? They actually, top answer, 33% of people said they remember first that the person asked them what they believe. And that's interesting, isn't it? Just that, again, it speaks not of monologue, speaks of dialogue, of relationship. But as you know, when we ask people about their own life experience, journey, faith, they usually ask you back, don't they? So again, we earn that right to then speak gently, appropriately into those conversations as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because when people start to think, oh, I'm going to go be missional and therefore I'm going to introduce my friends to Jesus and I'm going to pray for the conversation to turn around and they're going to ask me a question. Actually, you've just said there that it's not about waiting for them to come and ask the question. Maybe you could start to ask them the question, like, what do you believe about this?
Absolutely.
There are far simpler ways to prompt a conversation than to wait for a crisis to appear.
Yeah, that's right. Well, again, we only have to look at John 4, don't we, in Jesus' example of the woman at the well. He's hanging out in the right place at the right time, isn't he? He encounters this woman. He asks her simply to give him something to drink. There's just an immediate point of need, isn't there? And actually, as the conversation unfolds, then, yes, there comes this the light and truth and hope into that conversation. And, he exposes her life, doesn't he, but out of a place of love and care, and he journeys with her even in that moment. And I think you're right, absolutely. Even to, be praying ahead, praying even in our conversations that God will allow something to come to the fore that speaks of truth and hope. And one of the questions, again, going back to the research, we asked, what's the biggest question that people are asking at the current time? Now, aside from none of the above, which out of the questions that we pose, which even that is interesting, the challenge to us is, do we know what people's starting point is? What are people asking? But the top answer from Talking Jesus research was that, what was it going to get this right? Top answer, 19% of people said that their biggest question was, will everything be okay? And even that, again, doesn't it speak of just this unsettled nature of our current culture and context? People having come out of a global pandemic, when we had death of a queen, threat of war, ongoing threat of war, didn't we? Cost of living crisis, well-being, anxiety, all of these things. But what we also know that coming out of life events, of which we've had many, that has been the biggest significant influence and trigger for people exploring and coming to faith. So there's a lot in these contexts, aren't there, of how we find our friends, what culture and context they find themselves in. I don't know about you, Bob, but as I look at many of my peers, whilst there's lots of good things to enjoy, but there is a lot of pain and trauma and anxiety, whether it's in families or around kids or with aging parents and yet I believe as Christians, when we can share life in the real with people, often comes about situations and conversations where we can speak something of hope or peace or love or trust into the midst of those situations. So there's a lot of work to be done. Yeah,
and I'd agree, just even from a rural missions perspective and some of the churches and farming communities that we engage with, the concept of rural isolation has really started to really do on people, like mental health, anxiety, and even sadly the suicide rate amongst farming community especially is so staggering. And part of that is because no one's asking the questions and no one's coming alongside to journey with and to go, is everything okay? So I have no surprises whatsoever that the top answer is everything going to be all right? Because we're facing that. We've had a global pandemic. We are in the midst of a cost of living crisis. And with our switches in policies and governments and everything else, just the effect that's had across the agricultural community and those in small villages, it's staggering. So we have a part to play in the midst of this, and people are waiting for us to play our part.
Yeah, absolutely. And isn't the church incredibly well placed to be the hands and feet in Jesus into those, and to have our eyes that little bit wider open, to be, as you said, determining, leaning in, being present in situations, which is often so countercultural, isn't it? We could all very much live in our own boxes in isolation, couldn't we? We certainly had to during lockdown, as you said, but actually what does it look like for us as Christians in rural communities, particularly, as you said, to actually have our eyes open, think where are the places of need or of pain, and actually just to, again, be present in those spaces. Because however we're wired, whatever the circumstances, we know that people are born for relationship, aren't they? And it really counts. And certainly that comes out of the research, again, that people crave relationship. And yet in the midst of, as we said, some of those turmoils, the life events, the situations we find ourselves in, because God is who he is, he reaches in and he meets people at a point of need. And we can often be the channel for some of that, can't we? Going back to the statistics that said about what people, we asked non-Christians, what do you remember from the conversation that you've had with a practicing Christian? As we said, many people do know and could think of a practicing Christian that they know. And one of the stats that I love personally is that whilst it was only 6%, but still that's a good statistic, 6% of people said where they'd had a conversation with a Christian they know, in that moment they recall that they had a spiritual encounter. Wow. And I really love that sense that actually, even in that moment, that's despite of us most of the time, isn't it? Certainly despite of me. But, where we step out, where we encounter people, where we go to their point of need, where we do stuff together, where we put the invitation out, maybe we offer to pray. But isn't that encouraging that even in maybe a one-off conversation, maybe a whole train of conversations and getting to know someone that maybe we didn't know 2 weeks ago, 6 months ago, even in that conversation, Jesus can be present and they recognise that moment brought about a spiritual experience for them.
Wow. So we as the church have a real part to play in, as you say, being his hands and his feet in the midst of loneliness and depression and anxiety and frustrations, and to present some of the key answers that will help bring hope and restoration into the midst of that. There's a great charity that we work alongside, the Farming Community Network, that are supporting farmers, used to be called the Crisis Network. And was really there for farmers that were just at an end and needed people to talk to and to support them in the midst of that. So if you know any farmers and you're in conversation with them, point them to FCN. It's a great organisation doing a great work. And for those of you that are listening, that you also might be feeling isolated and lonely, and even as a Christian you're starting to contemplate a few things, then Rural Missions, we're here to support and encourage, but we're here to stand alongside you as well. So we have an ordained chaplain on our staff team, Bruce, and he is available to meet up with people online, in person, and we offer a free chaplaincy service. So if you're going through some stuff and would value another listening ear, someone to pray with you, then do check out our website, ruralmissions.org.uk, and you can book a free space with Bruce, because we want to support you in the midst of this and not just support our non-Christian friends, because we are in this together. So Rachel, there's some great statistics there. People can check that out at talkingjesus.org. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Look at that. I was listening. I had it in my head. Now, I've only got two more questions, because I'm conscious that I want to make the best use of our time. Now, as the head of missions for the EA, as someone that's going around with the Talking Jesus research, you're engaging with lots of individuals, lots of churches, and you've probably heard every excuse under the sun as to why they aren't being missional. So obviously you want to spur people, provoke them, show them statistics saying your friends are waiting for you. What are some of the things that people are going, I can't be missional because of?
Oh, good question. Where do we start? Do you know, I think so much comes down to the messaging that we've believed over many years, and also how we don't release ourselves into some of these circumstances. So my own personal story, let me start there. I became a Christian when I was 7 through a church-based holiday club in a fairly rural place. I was confirmed at 14 when I was in a Church of England. But I remember, I never swayed too far from faith, but I remember vividly being in my early 20s, being at uni and being passionate about my friendship group and having fun and working hard and so on as well, but really wanting them to come to know something of the peace and faith that I had in Jesus. And yet I remember just a point in time feeling like whilst I really wanted them to know something of Jesus, it felt to me like I was wearing a heavy rucksack that was full of rocks, because I felt completely crippled to share anything of my own faith with them. And I look back and I think what I became aware of was that actually the baggage was all on me. That actually the world at large, and I think whether we're in urban, rural, you've just mapped some of the challenges that we face, the traumas, the complexities of life, that I just became aware that actually, even in the midst of all of that, people were interested and open to talking about things of spirituality or of faith. And so I realised that the baggage was all on me, that it was only me who was holding myself back. And I don't remember exactly where I was or when it was, but I do remember a point in time. And there is method in why I share this with you, but it's only my own experience. There was a point in time where I thought, I want my friends to come to know something of the faith that I profess, that I would speak to. And I just remember being in a certain place and thinking, I need to get this rucksack off, because it's weighing me down, it's holding me back, and it's crippling me from not being to share life in its fullness, and certainly anything of my faith with my friends. And I just virtually in my own mind kind of stripped this off. And do you know what? I find the reason I share it is because it was utterly transformative for me to allow myself to enter into the conversations where I didn't need to say it all. Not every conversation had to be about my faith or answered prayer or about Jesus, but it allowed me to be that bit more intentional and feel released and freer to share something of, maybe you're talking about, the weather, the football scores, the holidays you've been on, the grief, the loss, the bereavement, and something then, that I might share then about aligning with that person, something about God's goodness and answered prayer in the midst of that grief and loss. And then you go back to talking about the weather and the football scores again. The reason I mention that, Bob, I guess, is just because I think actually God is so powerfully at work across our nations, that's for sure. What would it look like for us, anecdotally, maybe off the back of my story? My passion is, what would it look like for us as individuals, as the church, to be released more, to not think, I can't possibly do that because those people will shut me down, they'll think badly of me, they won't want to know. We know, as the survey says, that people are very open to things of faith. People are looking as to where to put their trust and hope, because they're asking, will everything be okay? What will make me happy? What should I do with my life? And so on. So I think actually my challenge to both myself, to us as the church or individuals, is actually how do we release ourselves, recognising that people do know us and they like us and they trust us. And actually against that backdrop, our words, our experience, our stories of faith will actually have impact. I think outside of that, I would just say we need to be good news people in a bad news world. It's been said before, we are good news people, aren't we? There's a lot of challenge. But yet, as I said earlier, we see stories all over the place. I do. I've been privileged with leaders, with organisations, to see in the urban, in the rural, in the places that, again, are not, big bustling churches. They have a few young people in or a few older people, but seeing great practice of small groups that form community and belonging and trust, become real hubs of faith and friendship and so on, and seeing God powerfully at work in those spaces. I've also seen small youth groups that have been crippled through the pandemic but being birthed back to life through putting on a football club or something that's out in the community. So I could share lots of stories with you, but suffice to say, maybe God's Spirit is powerfully at work. It's certainly not forgotten the rural areas, has it, as God hasn't forgotten the cities. But with a bit of creativity, a whole lot of prayer, then I think we stand in this day and age to see us as Christians being given greater confidence to reach into those situations where people are really seeking God and need him in their life. And I think people are more aware of that than they have been over the last few decades.
There you go. That's a good answer. And it really relates into all the podcasts we've had so far. Everything keeps coming back to what has God already gifted you with? What are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? And how do we invite our friends, our community into what is already happening, or what can we put on? Yeah. So I enjoy having a beer down the pub on a Monday night. Well, there's no harm in having a conversation about Jesus or prompting our friends to go, so what do you think about this in the midst of that journey? Yeah. Because as the statistics are showing, as the reports, as we hear from everyone so far, our friends are waiting. Yeah. People want to know about Jesus. and it's on us to start to share him in the midst of whatever we're up to with them.
I've kind of coined this phrase for myself, Bob, which is, what's the worst that can happen? You know, actually, when we do life, we do faith, you know, we just are in the normal situations, as you said, in the pub, in the gym, at the school gates, whatever it is. Actually, you know, to just be a little bit bolder and braver, give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? Because the reality is that actually where people do know us and like us and trust, they may not always agree with us, but who knows, as I've seen with some of my friends, particularly over the last year, in those places where they're either the highs of life or the lows of life, often those nuggets of truth that God may have gifted you or me to speak to, they come back to the fore, don't they? And they just might be just what they needed, or bringing hope, bringing peace, or they might even be transformational in that moment when they need it. So we've just got to give it a go and think, what's the worst that can happen?
So the way that we always end our podcast, Rachel, is to ask the question, do you have a story of hope that you could share with us?
Oh, goodness. Lots of stories of hope. I'll tell you one which is youth related, if that's okay.
Yeah,
we
sure.
share a great love
I love young people, so
of youth ministry.
I'm up for that.
Yeah, so, and I hope this connects into sort of a rural context as well. So I live in Ely, it's a tiny city. It's only a city because it has a big cathedral. But we, like so many other churches, have, you know, just a few young people. The pandemic was tricky for our young people, of course. But two things I guess I'd love to share with you, which I hope bring a story of hope. One is that it's been such a joy in my own church to see the power of the intergenerational nature of relationship. So we have a few young people, and what we've birthed over the last few years is almost like a mentoring buddy system where some of the older members of our church have reached into the lives of our young people. So they've buddied up, if you like, with one. We do at age 13 and up. But what's been a joy and loads of stories of hope looking at the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 young people has seen just them foster these great relationships with people much older than them. Sometimes it's, you know, with a teenager, with people who are 50, 60, 70 years old, and yet the joy of seeing that life on life shared love of, you know, doing things together, going for a walk, going to McDonald's, having a meal together or whatever it is, and seeing that. The second thing is, with some of our boys particularly, in my church, but I've seen this replicated elsewhere. I think I alluded to it earlier, but we've looked and thought, how can we connect with these young people who don't always come into our church or into a small youth group that we have, but actually we want to speak their language. And one thing we've done, to make it realistic, we've done it only every 3 months, but we've booked the local leisure centre or the football pitch and put the word out to try and captivate those boys and girls and so on to come along and be part of football. But then once we've got them and landed a date that works for them, we've opened it up to the wider family of the church. And the story of hope for me and of real joy is seeing on one football pitch, very simple, very pop-up, not expensive, but seeing a whole family of the church come together with people as young as 5, as old as 65 plus on a football pitch, sharing life, sharing fun time together, but being really intentional of keeping connected as the family of God. So those, not rocket science, but have been stories, I think, of where hope and community and belonging and faith has been able to play out even on a football pitch.
Brilliant. So, Rachel, thank you so much for sharing with us and for sharing some of the Talking Jesus research. If you want to find out more, you can head to talkingjesus.org. If our chaplaincy service will be of help, you can head to our website, ruralmissions.org.uk. If you want to contact Rachel, you can head over to ea.org.
eauk.org.
eauk.org. And I'm sure Rachel would love to come and share the research in person, share any of the missional output that she's up to, and be a support to you and your church. But thank you so much. Thank you all for listening. Please don't forget to like it, subscribe, share this with your friends, tell everyone, tell your mum, tell your friends. We'd love, the more listeners, the merrier. But we hope this has been of use, and we will see you again soon.
To find out how we can support your church, head to ruralmissions.org.uk.